Dave, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Andy. I appreciate you inviting me. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. So I think we have a lot of sort of common views on sales, at least based on reading your blog posts and mine. And sometimes I look at yours and think, geez, I could have written some of those pieces myself. So given sort of, assume some common background in sales, I'm interested to hear what you think about sort of the latest buzzword in sales, I think, is sales acceleration. In your mind, what is sales acceleration? How do you define it?
Well, I think it could be all over the place. I think, first let's maybe look at it individually, and it's really saying, how do we perform as sales professionals at the highest level we possibly can? So when you start looking at performance at an individual level, it's not only kind of meeting your overall number and your objectives, but it's looking at things, when I look at deals, doing deal strategies and things like that, I'm looking at really three things. How do I maximize my ability to win? How do I maximize my average transaction or deal profitability? And the third thing is, how do I compress the sales cycle, or how do I compress the buying cycle? So, I think high-performing salespeople are always looking at those elements and always looking at saying, how can I sharpen this up? How can I compress this? How can I do things faster, more effectively, more impactfully? So at an organizational level, I think that's it. At a managerial or at an organizational level, I think then you start looking at things like, do I have the right team? Do I have the right sales organization deployment? How do I look at different organizational models where I might leverage inside sales or channels or partners in some sort of combination to maximize the impact on my markets?
Okay. Well, a thought that I guess that came to mind as you were giving your answer is, do you think that compressing the sales cycle is a necessity, or is it something that is sort of a nice to have if you can do it? I mean, do you find that...
I think it's something you should always try and look at, but you always need to look at... Notice I put that third in priority.
Sure.
And so you really want to look at saying, how am I engaging with the customer? How am I, maybe the wrong thing is how do we accelerate sales, but how do we accelerate the customer in their buying cycle?
Exactly.
Because what we really are looking at from a customer point of view is their opportunity cost. The longer it takes them to understand what they want to buy, the longer it takes, the more they're deferring opportunities, whether it's new revenue, whether it's savings, whether it's competitiveness, and so on. So
right.
In reality, the issue isn't compressing the sales cycle or isn't sales acceleration, it's buyer acceleration.
I agree, and that's exactly what I talk about in my new book, is really the role of sales is how do you accelerate the customer from point of interest to crossing the finish line on their end.
Mm-hmm.
Have you in your work seen any sort of correlation between sales rep productivity or conversion rates tied to being able to compress the buying cycle? This competitive advantage that really accrues to the buyer through making faster decisions. Have you seen that work?
We see some when we look at kind of sales productivity numbers and sales pipeline numbers. Actually, where we really see it is in interesting things in win-loss analysis. I'm in a project. I've been involved in a very large project with a multi-billion-dollar company, and they had really very poor ideas of what sales performance was. They had different views of they knew they weren't making their revenue numbers and
right.
their plan numbers and so on. But when you started looking at the data, there are some really interesting things. For instance, it took them, if you looked at their very largest deals, and for them this was anything over, say, about $100,000, it took them on average somewhere around 72 days to win those deals.
Mm-hmm.
It took them on average somewhere around 180 days to lose those deals.
Interesting.
So, and when we start looking at data across a lot of organizations, you start seeing trends like that where maybe it's not sales acceleration, but it's hanging on to the wrong deals way too long.
Right, and spending time on it.
Spending time on them, and if I look at that 180 plus days it took to lose a deal, they could have gone out and won another 2 deals.
Exactly.
If they had selected the right deals.
So what's your advice to them in that event in terms of how to disqualify those deals that aren't going to be winners?
And I think that one of the biggest issues in pipeline management and sales effectiveness is vicious disqualification.
Right.
We chase the wrong deals. Now, so part of that is, I think, not the salesperson's or the sales organization problem. I think part of it is, what the organization really has to be looking at is the organization has to say and be really honest with themselves of what problems are we the best in the world at solving, and who has those problems.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you have that defined, and you define it very honestly, not fooling yourself, saying,
right.
We can be all things to all people,
exactly.
and we're the next best thing since sliced bread.
Right.
Is you define that honestly, and you get the people to focus viciously on that sweet spot, and then the customer. Then tied to that, then is how do you create a compelling sense of urgency? How do you get the customer to say, my current state is absolutely unacceptable, I have to change? So those are kind of secrets to qualification. Once you have that, the customer is going to go through their buying cycle rip-roaring fast.
Right.
We're going to go through our sales cycle with them very, very quickly, and we're going to produce results for each other at a much accelerated pace.
Yeah, I love your phrase of vicious disqualification. In my first book, I talk about, had a chapter or a whole section of the book called "Disqualify the Losers," and trying to put it pretty bluntly that people are going to consume your time if you let them. Prospects that have no intention of buying from you, because they really don't have an incentive, even if they're not going to buy from you, to tell you to go away. And I think in some portion of those cases, at least I find that you had your clients that were spending 182 days on it. If they'd really requalified the prospect in the process, they would have found that maybe their chances of winning were much less than they thought they were.
Well, I think there are a lot of issues with that. I think there are issues with on the sales side and on the customer side, maybe with wishful or aspirational thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I tend to think this issue, what I call a disqualification or qualification issue, of how do you create this compelling sense of urgency. If you don't do that up front in the sales process, your selling cycle, your buying cycle can stretch on forever. And it's well-intended people doing well-intended things, but it goes on forever, and so you have to really do that. So you see so many challenges and problems around that, and that's why I think you see an increasing percentage of no decision made. The customer just can't get to a decision point, however well-intended they are. So all of those things impact the dynamics of the pipeline.
Well, let's drill into that point. So why do you think there's an increase in your mind? Why do you think there's an increase in the number of no decision made decisions that are happening?